The gate at Changi Airport smelled like orchids and floor polish, that strange Singaporean combination of nature and efficiency that no other airport on earth seems to manage. I stood near the window with my boarding pass in one hand and my phone in the other, watching a 777 push back from the jet bridge across the tarmac, its tail catching the morning light. My phone buzzed. A text from Petra. "Hey, what does your weekend look like?" I read it twice, not because the words were complicated, but because I wanted to make sure I understood the question the way it was actually being asked. She wasn't asking what my weekend looked like the way you ask someone who's 3 time zones and 11,000 miles away. She was asking the way you ask a husband. Casual, assumed, like nothing had changed, like I was still someone whose Saturday she had a right to picture. I looked up at the departure board. Gate transferring in 18 minutes. Flight to Tokyo Narita, connecting through to a life I hadn't told her about yet. Because there was nothing left to negotiate about it, I opened my camera. I didn't pose for it. I didn't try to look happy or sad or triumphant. I just held the phone up so the gate signage was visible behind me. Singapore Changi, the flight number, the boarding time, and I took the picture the way you document a fact. Because that's what it was. A fact. I was here. This was real. This was already done. I sent it without a caption. No explanation, no softening, just the image, landing in a conversation thread that used to be full of grocery lists and dinner plans and love you, see you tonight. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then they disappeared, then they appeared again. My phone rang 12 seconds later. Her name on the screen, the photo from 4 Christmases ago, the one where she's laughing at something off camera and I'm looking at her instead of the camera, which had always felt like the whole marriage in a single image, if I'm honest about it now. I let it ring. I watched it ring, actually, watched her name sit there on the screen through all 4 buzzes, watched it go still when the call dropped to voicemail. I felt strangely calm doing it. Not cruel, not vindicated, just settled, the way you feel when a decision has already been made somewhere underneath you and your body is simply catching up to it. A text came through. "Are you really on a plane right now?" "Boarding in 20 minutes, I typed back. 6 words, nothing more. A longer pause this time. The kind you could feel even through a phone screen, even across the distance between Seattle and Singapore, even through everything that had already broken between the sending of one message and the next. "Eli, please." I looked at those 2 words for a moment. Then I put the phone in my bag, screen down, and I didn't take it out again. They called Group 2 for boarding. I got in line behind a businessman speaking rapid Mandarin into a headset and in front of a family wrangling 2 kids and 4 carry-ons with the practiced chaos of people who'd done this 100 times before. The line inched forward toward the jet bridge. I moved with it. 6 years earlier, I hadn't known a single thing about any of this. 6 years earlier, I was standing at a bar in Seattle, watching a woman in a green dress rearrange a centerpiece by 3 inches and somehow make an entire room look different. My name is Eli Carver. I'm 38 years old, and 6 years ago I was standing at a bar in a rented event space in downtown Seattle, watching a woman in a green dress reach across a table she had no business touching and move a centerpiece 3 inches to the left. It shouldn't have mattered. It was a flower arrangement at a fundraiser for the UW Medical Center, one of 100 small details nobody would remember by morning. But she moved it, stepped back, and the whole table clicked into place in a way I couldn't have explained if you'd asked me to. I was there with a client. She was there representing the design firm that had done the room. I introduced myself because I didn't have a better excuse not to. Her name was Petra Vane. She told me she was divorced within the first 10 minutes, which I'd later understand was very her. Get the complicated thing out in the open early, on her own terms, before anyone else could frame it for her. Her ex-husband's name was Damon. 4 years of marriage, they'd stayed friends. "We just grew in different directions," she said, and she said it the way you'd mention the weather, easy, weightless, already finished. I remember thinking, this is a woman who has closed her doors properly. I didn't know yet that some doors don't stay closed just because you say they are. We were engaged 14 months later, married on a vineyard on Bainbridge Island, the ferry ride over so calm the water looked painted on, 40 guests who actually mattered to us instead of the guest list you assemble out of obligation. She wore something simple and ivory that moved when she walked, and I remember standing at the front of that aisle thinking I had never in my life been more certain of a decision. We bought a townhouse in East Lake, 4 blocks off the water, close enough that on clear mornings you could see Mount Rainier sitting on the horizon from our bedroom window like it had been placed there for us specifically. Petra redesigned the interior herself, floor to ceiling, and I remember the first morning after we moved the last box in, standing in the kitchen with coffee, looking at a space that looked like something out of a magazine and somehow still felt like it had our fingerprints all over it. That's a harder trick than people think. Most beautiful rooms feel like nobody lives in them. Ours didn't. For 2 years, that was the whole story. Nothing complicated. I'd come home from Meridian on a Tuesday and find her curled up on the window seat with fabric swatches spread across her lap like a hand of cards. And she'd hold one up without looking at me and say, "This or this," and I'd pick wrong every time, and she'd laugh and pick the other one anyway. Saturday mornings we ran the loop around Lake Union together, and she was faster than me and never let me forget it. We had people over. We had a life that looked, from the outside and from the inside, like something that was working. Damon Reyes existed during those 2 years the way an old photograph exists in a drawer. Present, technically, but not something you thought about unless you went looking. Petra mentioned him occasionally, a text around the holidays, running into him at a mutual friend's engagement party. She was mature about it, and I respected that. I want to be clear, I was never the jealous type. I never once, in those first 2 years, felt threatened by the fact that my wife had a life before me. Then, in the spring of our 3rd year, Petra's firm picked up a client who wanted his backyard reimagined, and somebody at the firm mentioned that a landscaper out in Fremont did exactly this kind of work. Had a real eye for it, was building a name for himself. Petra came home that night and told me over dinner, almost as an aside, that the landscaper was Damon. Small world, I said. We're both in the design world, she said, with a small shrug that I remember specifically because it was the first time I'd seen her shrug about him at all. Not that surprising. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I have? It was one referral, one professional courtesy, the kind of coincidence that happens in a city where everyone in a given industry eventually crosses paths with everyone else. I finished my dinner. I didn't ask a single follow-up question. By the following fall, she was having lunch with him weekly. By winter, she was stopping by Damon's place on Saturdays to look at his garden renovations, because he wanted her professional eye, he said, and by spring the weekends had turned into something neither of us had ever actually agreed to. They were just there, the way a schedule becomes real by nobody objecting to it. I noticed. I want to be honest about that. I noticed every single Saturday that left at 9 in the morning and didn't come back until evening. Every Friday night that turned into, I might just stay and help him finish this one thing. I noticed and I said nothing, because every time I rehearsed the sentence in my head, "I don't like how much time you're spending with your ex-husband," I heard it come out of my mouth in her voice instead of mine. Jealous husband, controlling, a man who doesn't trust his wife. I'd grown up watching my parents' marriage get slowly strangled by exactly that kind of policing, my father tracking my mother's calls, timing her trips to the grocery store, and I had promised myself a long time ago that I would never become a man who needed to manage a woman to feel secure in loving her. So I stayed quiet. I told myself that was strength. The first real crack came in November, at my colleague Nadia's birthday dinner. It wasn't a big deal, 6 of us at a restaurant in Belltown, the kind of evening Petra usually liked, good food, easy conversation, nothing complicated about it. She'd known for 2 weeks. She came home from Damon's that Friday at 6:30, dropped her bag by the door, and told me she was exhausted. Could I go without her? We already told Nadia we'd both be there, I said. Eli, I've been on my feet all day. Can you just go without me? I went without me is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because what I actually did was go alone, sit at a table of people who knew both of us, and tell them Petra wasn't feeling well. I remember Nadia's face when I said it, not suspicious exactly. Just a flicker of something, gone as fast as it appeared. I drove home around 10. The house was dark, Petra was already in bed, phone face down on the nightstand, screen just barely visible in the dark, like she'd set it down in a hurry when she heard my key in the door. I stood in the doorway for a second, looking at that phone. I didn't say anything. I got undressed in the dark and lay down on my side of the bed, and the empty half of it didn't feel empty because she wasn't there. It felt empty because she was right there, and it still felt like nobody was. 2 weeks after that, I tried again. She'd come home from Damon's on a Saturday evening, and I was at my desk in the corner of the living room, working through some numbers I didn't actually need to be working through, using them as an excuse to still be awake when she walked in. I turned my chair around. I want to talk about the amount of time you're spending over there, I said. I'd practiced saying it evenly, and I mostly managed it. She tilted her head, already half defensive before I'd finished the sentence. What about it? I feel like we've lost our weekends. Between Friday nights and Saturdays, you're gone most of the week now. Damon's going through a hard time, she said. His business partner just walked out on him. He needs a friend right now. I understand that. What I'm saying is I feel like I'm losing track of you. She looked at me with an expression that wasn't quite patience and wasn't quite irritation, some flattened middle ground between the two. Eli, he's my friend. We've talked about this. We haven't, actually. Not really. I'm not doing anything wrong. I didn't say you were. It sounds like you think I am. And there it was, the same pivot every time, the same maneuver that turned my concern into her defense before I'd even finished raising it. I didn't know how to push back on that without sounding like exactly the man I'd sworn never to become, so I backed off. Told her I wasn't accusing her of anything, just telling her how I felt. She said she'd try to check in more. She didn't check in more. Nothing changed, except that now we both knew I'd noticed and neither of us said anything about that either. By spring, the quiet had a texture to it. We still had dinner together 4 or 5 nights a week. We still asked each other how the day went. But there was a performance underneath all of it, a kind of managed distance dressed up as normalcy. I remember one night at the Italian place on Pine Street on Capitol Hill, the restaurant where we'd had our first real date. Sitting across from her under the same string lights we'd sat under 6 years earlier, and understanding, clearly, for the first time, that I was performing. I was doing the relaxed dinner with my wife routine, hitting all the right beats, and when I looked up at her laughing at something the waiter said, I thought, is she doing the exact same thing I am right now? I didn't ask her. I ordered another glass of Barolo and talked about something safe. Ford Gallagher had been at Meridian for 22 years. Long enough that he understood the business the way most people understand breathing, without having to think about it. He called me on a Tuesday morning in January, and I remember exactly where I was standing when my phone lit up with his name, because calls from Ford at 9 in the morning meant something. There's an opportunity in Singapore, he said, no preamble, which was very Ford. We're expanding the Asia-Pacific operation. I need someone to head the new regional analysis team out of the Singapore office. 3-year commitment, review option after that. I'd known, in the way you know things about your own career without anyone saying them out loud, that I'd been on Ford's radar for something like this for a while. He knew my work, he'd watched me handle accounts that mattered, and he'd never once had to correct my read on a situation. What's the compensation look like? I asked. He told me. I stood there in my kitchen holding the phone against my ear and did the kind of quiet recalculating you do when a number reorganizes what you thought was possible for your life. I'll need a few days, I said. You've got a week. I went home that night and told Petra over dinner. We were at the table, plates in front of us, and I laid it out carefully, the role, the location, the 3-year term, the number Ford had given me. She listened without interrupting, which I remember registering as a good sign at the time, before I understood it was just her gathering the shape of her objection before she said anything. When I finished, she set her fork down on the edge of her plate. Deliberately, the way you set something down when you want the sound of it to matter. Singapore, she said, like she was testing the word for weight. Eli, I can't move to Singapore. My entire career is here. My clients, my firm, everything I've built is in Seattle. I know, I said. I'm not saying we have to decide anything tonight. I just wanted you to know it exists. She nodded slowly, but her eyes hadn't softened at all. Are you seriously considering it? It's the most significant opportunity that's ever come to me. So yes, I'm seriously considering it. She didn't say much for the rest of the meal. Later that night, lying in the dark with the ceiling fan turning slow circles above us, she told me she thought we should stay in Seattle. That our life here was something worth protecting. That she didn't want to uproot everything we'd built for what she called a 3-year experiment on the other side of the world. I lay there and I let the silence stretch, because some part of me was still hoping she'd get to the end of that sentence and add something else. But if it matters this much to you, let's figure it out together. She never got there. The silence just settled, and I understood that it was the whole answer. I called Ford the next morning before I'd even finished my coffee. I'm passing, I said. You sure? His voice didn't have judgment in it, just the flat question of a man who'd heard people talk themselves out of things before and wanted to know if this was one of those times. Family comes first, I said. I understand, he said. The door won't close completely. Circumstances change. Reach out if they do. I hung up the phone and told myself I'd made the right call, the adult call, the call a man makes when he loves someone more than he loves a job title. I believed that completely in the moment. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy now, knowing everything I know, to pretend I saw it coming, that some part of me clocked what was about to happen and turned down Singapore anyway out of some noble, doomed conviction. That's not true. I felt good about it. I felt like a man protecting something worth protecting. I didn't yet understand that the sacrifice wouldn't be acknowledged or reciprocated. We'd talked about it on Thursday, loosely, the way you talk about a plan you actually intend to keep. Olympic Sculpture Park in the morning, maybe the drive out to Snoqualmie Falls in the afternoon if the weather held. It wasn't a big plan. That was the point of it. Just a Saturday, just the two of us, the kind of ordinary day that used to happen without anyone having to schedule it. Saturday morning, she texted me. Damon needed help picking furniture for his new living room. She'd try to be back by 3. She got home at 7:15. I was in the living room with a book I wasn't really reading anymore, had been holding the same page for probably 40 minutes by the time I heard her key in the door. I didn't say anything when she walked in. I heard her in the kitchen, the refrigerator opening, closing, the specific small sounds of someone stalling before they come find you. Then she was standing in the doorway of the living room. "You're upset," she said. "I'm reading." I didn't look up. "You're doing the quiet thing." I put the book down on my knee, kept my finger in the page like I was planning to go back to it. "The Snoqualmie thing," I said. "You said you'd try to be back by 3. Damon had more questions than I expected. It just went long. "Petra." I said her name and let it sit there a second before I finished the sentence. "I turned down Singapore for this marriage." Something shifted in her face, fast, like I'd reached for something she'd been keeping in a locked drawer. "Don't do that." "Don't do what?" "Don't use Singapore as a weapon every time we argue." "I'm not using it as a weapon. I'm telling you I made a significant sacrifice for this relationship, and I feel like it's been completely invisible to you. I didn't ask you to turn down Singapore. You told me you wanted to stay in Seattle. I told you what I wanted. The decision was yours." I looked at her for a long moment. There was something too precise in the way she'd said it, like she'd built that sentence in advance and had just been waiting for the right argument to use it in. "I want to know where this is going," I said. "With Damon. With us. I want to know what we're actually doing here." "What does that mean?" "It means I feel like a roommate in my own marriage. And I want to know if you feel that way too, or if it's just me." She crossed her arms. Her jaw set the way it did when she'd already made a decision and was just organizing the words to deliver it. It was Sunday morning by then, technically, past midnight when this had started, the two of us still in the kitchen in the gray early light coming through the window over the sink. She was still in her yoga clothes from Damon's the night before. "Eli," she said, and her voice had gone very calm, very deliberate. "Damon is my friend. He was in my life before you, and he's going to be in my life going forward. If you can't handle me spending time with my ex-husband, then maybe we're not right for each other." I set my coffee mug down on the counter. I did it slowly, carefully, the way you set something down when you don't trust your hand not to do something else instead. I looked at her for 3 full seconds. Long enough that I watched her expression start to prepare for whatever she thought was coming next, the raised voice, the accusation, the fight she'd clearly braced herself for. "You're right," I said. She blinked. It wasn't the response she'd rehearsed for, and I could see that instantly. The small confusion crossing her face before she could smooth it over. "What? You're absolutely right," I said. "I appreciate you saying that clearly." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I picked my coffee back up, took a sip like the conversation had reached a natural conclusion, because as far as I was concerned, it had. Then I set the mug down again and walked past her, up the stairs, into the bedroom we'd shared for 6 years, and sat down on the edge of the bed. I sat there for a long time, long enough that the light outside the window changed, moved from gray to something closer to pale gold. I wasn't angry, not in the way you'd expect. It was quieter than that, and more final. The specific stillness of watching a number you've spent a year trying to make work resolve itself cleanly into an answer you'd stopped being able to argue with. I picked up my phone, scrolled to Ford Gallagher's name, pressed call. He answered on the second ring. "Ford," I said, "is the Singapore position still available?" Ford called back the following Tuesday. The position was still open. They'd been weighing internal candidates but hadn't committed to anyone, and he needed my answer within the week. I gave it to him in about 4 seconds. Everything after that moved with the strange, efficient speed of a decision that had actually already been made a long time ago and was only now catching up to the paperwork. Background check, contract review, visa applications. I called my brother Theo in Portland that same week, and he was quiet on the line for a moment before he asked the only question that mattered to him. "How long have you been thinking about this?" "About a year," I said. "I just didn't admit it to myself until now." "You good?" "I'm good. I think I've been not good for a while, and this is me fixing it." That was Theo. He didn't tell me what to feel about it, didn't offer an opinion on Petra or the marriage or any of it. He just asked if I needed help and meant it, and said he'd be there for whatever logistics I needed whenever I needed them. Some people give you their opinion when you're going through something. Theo just gave you his presence, which, it turns out, is the rarer gift. I hired a divorce attorney named Carol Ashworth, an office on 2nd Avenue, recommended by a colleague who'd gone through his own split 2 years back. She was direct in the way I needed someone to be direct with me right then. No wasted sympathy, no soft landing, just the facts of what I was walking into. Washington's a community property state, she told me in our first meeting. Given the length of the marriage and the assets involved, here's what you should expect. She walked me through the whole framework, and I took notes like I was in a client meeting, because that was the only way I knew how to survive information like that without falling apart in the middle of it. I told Petra on a Thursday evening. We were in the kitchen, the same counter where she'd set her ultimatum down like a verdict 2 weeks earlier. Sit down, I said. I need to tell you something. She sat. Something in my face must have told her this wasn't a conversation, because she went very still before I'd said a single word. I called Ford Gallagher last Sunday night. I took the Singapore position. I've also spoken with an attorney. You'll be served with papers this week. I didn't want that to be the first you heard of any of it. Eli, her voice came out barely above a whisper. You told me if I couldn't handle your arrangement with Damon, maybe we weren't right for each other. I've thought about that a lot this week. I think you were right. I didn't mean it like that. I understand, but I've been thinking about it, and I think it was more honest than you meant it to be. She stood up, sat back down, hands flat on the table the way people do when they're trying to keep something from shaking loose. You're leaving the country. You're leaving. I start in 6 weeks. Eli, I love you. I know you do. I said, I don't think love has been our problem. I didn't comfort her that night. I didn't know how to do that honestly without making promises I had no intention of keeping. I made dinner because we both still needed to eat, and we sat across from each other and barely spoke, and afterward I went up to the bedroom and she stayed on the couch, and I don't know how late she sat there in the dark. The weeks that followed were the slow, methodical dismantling of 6 years. The townhouse in East Lake had to be dealt with, sold. Or she could buy out my half. She said she'd think about it. I started sorting my things with the same calm, deliberate focus that had always served me at work. Books I was keeping, books I was leaving, art that was hers, art that was mine, the handful of pieces we'd bought together that had to be negotiated like small treaties. My friend Todd came over one Saturday and helped me pack boxes into a storage unit near South Lake Union. We worked mostly in silence, the comfortable kind, the kind you only get with someone who's known you long enough not to need to fill the air. At one point he sat back on his heels next to a half-taped box and looked at me. You don't have any regrets? About leaving? No. About the marriage being what it was? Yeah, of course. You think she ever crossed a line with him? I honestly don't know, I said. At some point I stopped being sure, and at some other point I stopped being sure it was even the most important question. Todd nodded slowly, taping the box shut. What's the most important question, then? Whether I was willing to spend the next 30 years feeling the way I've felt this last one. I didn't have to think about the answer. That was the part that scared me a little, how clear it already was. Petra's sister Vera reached out to me a few days later. I'd always liked Vera. She had a directness Petra sometimes lacked, the kind that didn't dress things up before handing them to you. We met for coffee near the East Side rail station. She's devastated, Vera said. I believe that, I told her. She doesn't understand how you went from 0 to Singapore in 1 week. Vera said, watching me carefully over her cup. It wasn't 1 week, I said. It was a year of 1 week at a time. Vera looked down at her coffee for a long moment. She said you never really told her how bad it was. I told her, in November, in February, in March. Every time, I said the words in our kitchen, and every time she turned it around and told me I was the one being unreasonable. Vera didn't argue with that. She just let it sit there for a second. What do you want her to understand? That the ultimatum she gave me wasn't a threat. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. She thought she was drawing a line to protect herself. What she was actually doing was finally telling me the truth about her priorities. I just finally believed her. Vera drove back to Bellevue, and I drove back to what had increasingly stopped feeling like home and started feeling like an apartment I used to live in. 6 days before my flight, Petra came to me with something I hadn't expected. She'd been splitting nights between her sister's place and the townhouse, and we'd been moving through the same rooms with the careful choreography of 2 people trying not to cause any more damage than they already had. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I ended things with Damon, she said. The whole friendship. I blocked him on everything. I told him he'd cost me my marriage and I couldn't have him in my life anymore. I looked at her for a long moment, not sure what she wanted me to do with that. I'd spent a year watching a pattern with a very clear shape and a very clear trajectory. Watching it end 6 days before my flight didn't rewrite the shape it had already taken. Petra, I said, I believe you, and I also believe you didn't understand how serious this was until I did something you couldn't talk your way around. What does that mean? It means every time I told you this was hurting us, you told me I was the problem. The only language that actually got through to you was me leaving. She was quiet. I let the silence sit there instead of filling it. That's not a foundation, I said. That's not how two people are supposed to work. The night before my flight, I was on Todd's roof deck in Queen Anne, 2 beers deep, watching the lights across Elliott Bay go still as midnight came and went. The Space Needle sat lit up to the south the way it always does, that strange, familiar landmark that never stops looking like the picture of Seattle you carry around in your head even after you've lived there 11 years. You feel ready? Todd asked. I've never been to Singapore, I said. I don't know what ready looks like. I mean for all of it. I thought about the townhouse in East Lake, already half emptied, that would be sold by the time I next set foot in this city. About the mountain view from a bedroom window I'd probably never wake up to again. About 6 years of building something with someone, and the particular, specific grief of watching it turn out to be something other than what you needed it to be. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. We stayed up there until almost 1 in the morning, not saying much toward the end, just sitting with the city laid out below us like something we were both saying goodbye to in our own ways. He drove me to a hotel near SeaTac, told me he'd come visit once I was settled, and I told him I'd hold him to it. I was alone in the room by 1:30. Flight was at 10:15. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling in that particular way you do when you're too wired to sleep and too tired to do anything useful with the hours. I thought about the 11 years since I'd taken the job at Meridian, about how much of a life can accumulate around you without your ever noticing it accumulating. A marriage, a house, a version of yourself you'd stopped questioning. I waited for the sadness I assumed was supposed to be there. It didn't come, not the way I expected. What I felt instead was something closer to stillness. Something closer to ready. The text came at 9:47 the next morning. Hey, what does your weekend look like? By then I was already through security, already past the gate, already sitting in the boarding area for the Singapore Airlines flight that would take me to Tokyo Narita and then on to Chani. I looked at her question for a second, and I understood, with total clarity, that I finally had an honest answer for her. I opened the camera, held the phone up so the gate signage sat clean in the frame behind me. Singapore, the flight number, the boarding time. I took the picture the way you document a fact, not the way you pose for one. I sent it, no caption, nothing else needed saying. My phone rang almost immediately. I watched her name sit there on the screen, watched it ring through, and let it go to voicemail. A text landed a few seconds later. Are you really on a plane right now? And I typed back 6 words. Boarding in 20 minutes. A longer pause this time. Then, Eli, please. I put the phone in my bag, screen down, and didn't take it out again. They called Group 2. I got in line behind a businessman speaking rapid Mandarin into a headset. In front of a family managing 2 kids and 4 carry-ons with the practiced choreography of people who'd done this 100 times before. The line moved forward toward the jet bridge, past the window where a 777 sat waiting on the tarmac in the gray Seattle morning light. I moved with it. Singapore is 17 hours ahead of Seattle, and when I landed at Chani the next morning local time, the first thing I noticed wasn't the airport itself, efficient as everyone always says it is. It was the light, something warmer and more direct than anything the Pacific Northwest ever produces, like the sun down here had actually made a decision about something. Suki Tan met me at the Meridian office in Marina Bay that first week, a Singaporean analyst who'd been running Asia-Pacific operations for 4 years and knew exactly how the machine worked. You need 48 hours to adjust to the time zone, she told me, flat and practical. Don't fight it. Eat, sleep when you can. Get sun during daylight hours. By day 3, you'll feel human. She was right. By day 3 I felt something close to human. By the end of the first week, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I wanted to admit, fully present in whatever room I was standing in, without the low, constant static of a marriage quietly falling apart running underneath everything. I found an apartment in Tanjong Pagar, a neighborhood that felt like it was mid-reinvention, old shophouses standing next to new glass towers. Hawker centers tucked below apartment blocks. I learned the MRT lines the way you learn a new language, one mistake at a time. Found a coffee place near the office run by a guy named Henry who made espresso that actually changed how I understood coffee. It was small at first, all of it, the size of a hotel room, a commute, a subway map. But it was mine in a way nothing had felt mine in a long time. Carol Ashworth handled the divorce from Seattle. Petra cooperated the whole way through. Which didn't surprise me. She was, underneath the defensiveness, a fundamentally decent person. The townhouse sold in 3 weeks, a good price for both of us. Seattle real estate moves fast when the house is right. She sent one email, midway through the process. Short, formal, I understand now what I did and didn't do. I'm sorry, I hope Singapore is everything you needed it to be. I read it a few times before I answered. Take care of yourself, Petra. I hope things go well for you. And I meant every word of it, which still surprises me a little when I think back on it. That you can genuinely wish someone well after they've hurt you, once you've gotten far enough from the hurt to see the whole shape of it clearly. She wasn't a villain. She was a person who got something wrong and couldn't see it from inside the moment she was living in. That's a human failure, not a monstrous one. Damon, for what it's worth, wasn't the great friend she'd apparently been willing to sacrifice a marriage for. Todd told me through the grapevine that connects every city eventually that Damon started seeing someone new within weeks of Petra cutting him off. I don't know if that means anything. It's not information I needed, but it landed anyway, the way those things do. I've been in Singapore 14 months now. The Asia-Pacific team has grown to 7 analysts under my direction, managing a portfolio that would have seemed abstract to me back when I was sitting in the Seattle office turning this job down the first time. I know this city's neighborhoods the way I know Seattle's, not perfectly, but personally. Where to eat on a Tuesday? Where to run on a Saturday? Which hawker stalls are worth standing in line for? Todd came out in month 4. We ate our way through half the hawker centers in the city and argued the entire weekend about whether Singapore was a city-state that had genuinely figured something out or an authoritarian experiment with excellent infrastructure. I still think both things are probably true. My father called every week for the first few months, worried in the specific way fathers worry about decisions they don't fully understand. By month 5 he'd stopped worrying and started asking questions about the work instead, which is how I knew he'd finally made peace with it. Theo visited in month 8. He stood in my apartment looking out at the skyline and said, "You seem like yourself." What did I seem like before? I asked, half joking. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He was right, and we both knew it. I stayed quiet too long about things that mattered. I turned down Singapore the first time because some part of me believed self-sacrifice and love were the same thing, and they're not. Self-sacrifice without honesty is just a debt that quietly breeds resentment until it comes due. I waited for Petra to notice what I needed instead of telling her plainly, and when she didn't notice, I mistook her blindness for rejection instead of what it actually was. 2 people who'd stopped knowing how to talk to each other. What it cost me to learn that lesson was a marriage and a townhouse with a view of Lake Union. What it gave me back was harder to put a price on. I still run along the Marina Bay waterfront most Saturday mornings. The light comes up over the strait and catches the super trees at Gardens by the Bay, and for a few minutes the whole skyline looks like something someone dreamed up and then, improbably, decided to actually build. I think about Seattle sometimes, the particular sound of rain there. Softer and more constant than anything here. The mountain view from a bedroom window I don't sleep in anymore. I don't miss my marriage. That still catches me off guard sometimes, how true it is. What I miss is what I thought my marriage was going to be, and it took me a long time to understand there's a real difference between those two things. I'm 38 years old. I run a team in one of the most demanding financial markets on earth, and I sleep straight through the night now. Most nights, for the first time in years. Some sacrifices cost you something. Some sacrifices give you back yourself.